during those intermediate periods of a number of days. I think that's where everybody looks at it. You're going to have a few days into and out of storms when you're transitioning from that 7,100 to something, you know, low enough that you got to kick down to the 1,500 under the DWR and Bureau proposal. You're talking a few hundred CFS at a time for short periods, for a few days. Nobody explained how that's an impact to any fish. Nobody's been able to do that. We know exactly what we can do with the water. So I hope that helps you with your reasonableness test. Thank you.
Thank you. That puts it in terms I understand. Jennifer Buckman, followed by, let's see, Lucille Dimitrov.
Lucille and Sean Guyvet both left because they're from Porterville and they had a 4-hour drive home, but they had written statements, so in the interest
You'll
of time,
submit
I won't
those?
read them. I'll just
Okay, and then how about, Juvenile Montemayor?
Yeah, he is from Delano, so he also left.
Okay.
I wanted to thank your staff for hanging in here tonight for all these hours, and also for accommodating our request for priority earlier in the day. Particularly Jean and Rich were really easy to work with, and I really appreciate them making it so that our folks who came up on the buses had the opportunity to speak and get to go home at a reasonable hour.
Absolutely. You sort of thank all the people who didn't make it
Yeah.
as a result, too. But.
Yeah. It's a long day for all of us. Starting this morning, one of the lawmakers who came up said she took issue with the idea that we would be prioritizing any region over any other region. And we at Friant also take issue with that because that's kind of what happened to us last year under the drought operations plan. And our issues are more with the drought contingency plan than with the temporary urgency change petition itself. We are in agreement with other water contractors on their position on the temporary urgency change petition, but we want to make sure that the drought operations plan that gets approved as part of this process doesn't do to us what happened to us last year. I think you heard today that while it's true that the impacts of the drought and how the water was allocated last year aren't limited to any one area, they are most severe in our area.
Right.
14 of the 15 communities in California that are out of water, where people can't flush their toilets and haven't been able to take a shower since last May, are in the Friant service area. And there's a reason for that. And the reason isn't that the system is antiquated. The reason is that people didn't follow the rules in the system last year. So it's really important to these folks that, you know, you're the agency that enforces these rules. It's really important to them that the rules get enforced this year so that they don't get left high and dry again. There were some comments, and Steve touched on it as well, that, you know, 5,100 acre feet really isn't a lot of water one way or the other. The entire Friant service area was given for it to serve all of its disadvantaged communities last year, about 6,000 acre feet. If we got another 5,100 acre feet, that would have doubled the total, more or less, of what we got. So it's a lot of water to us. It's a lot of water to these people. So every bit does count for us. Obviously, what we got last year wasn't nearly enough. We used all available groundwater, and still we had all these communities that ran out of water. Basically, the system that we have is a conjunctive use system, and it got broken by what happened last year with the zero allocation. And just here's where we get to the legal part of it. There should be no set of circumstances under which the Friant Division gets a zero allocation, period. There's an exchange that is made in order to develop the water of the San Joaquin for the Friant Division. When that exchange is being performed, the water that's stored in Friant is for the benefit of the Friant contractors. When it's not being performed, the other waters of the San Joaquin that were purchased or acquired by the Bureau and approved by this board in D935 are supposed to be for the benefit of the Friant Division. And had we gotten those waters last year, our conjunctive use system wouldn't be broken like it is now. So I would just reiterate what Carmen Garza said when she closed her remarks. We're asking you to do everything that you can in your power under the law to help us. That's all we want. We just want you to enforce the rules. Thank you for your time.
I have a
Thank you
question.
very
The
much.
6,000 acre feet,
Yeah,
okay, so did that come out of Millerton or that came out of the Delta?
Millerton.
And that was
Okay,
M&I
but
from
was
the
it-
Bureau?
Yeah, so there's
Were
no
were you given-
specific
were you-
M&I.
I mean, I know you can't pump it there, but were you given credit because of the
It was a
health
class
and
one
safety?
allocation for health and safety needs. There's no specific M&I
Oh, yeah, health and safety. sorry, that's what I
within,
meant to
yeah,
say.
there's no specific M&I within the Friant division. The M&I needs are, and it's referenced in our comments, they're taking, including the disadvantaged communities, they're taken care of by making a reference to the district. And if you read D935, it goes through how they went through this process of determining not to have a specific M&I, separate M&I categories. What they did was they gave them class one contracts. So our 6 cities, including the city of Fresno, the 5th largest city in the state, which got 0 last year and can't get 0 again this year, you know, those folks all have a class one contract. If you don't make a class one allocation in Friant, the M&I doesn't get served. That's just how it happens for our system.
Okay, so in this year, you would benefit because the additional water would go presumably to a priority.
It maximizes the terms of the exchange.
It would go to the exchange contractors, so it would reduce by an equal amount the call.
Yeah, there may come a time when the Bureau won't be able to continue to perform the exchange. That's possible. It's possible that the system is so dry. But at that point, then the exchange contractors would be on their reserved rights on the San Joaquin, and we would get the purchase and other rights that were acquired on the San Joaquin for the Friant Division. But all the water that comes out of the Delta that helps maximize the time that that exchange is in place helps us develop water for those communities. And yeah. And it's a conjunctive use system. In Porterville, for example,
Right, that's the reason.
we run the water down the lower Tule River through the Porterville Slough, and those wells get recharged. That's how that happens. When they ran emergency supplies to the community of Terabella last year, under the little bit of water that we did get, they ran it on the canal down 152, and 6 or 8 of the folks I knew whose domestic wells were out on that stretch of ground. When we ran that water, their domestic wells popped back up. It was designed as a conjunctive use system. It's all documented in Bulletin number 29 and approved by the voters in 1933.
Thank you. To be continued. I know it's really late, but I have a couple questions. I'll defer to my colleagues if you want to start. All right. I mean, I do think there's a lot that we've taken in today that's important, and all kinds of, you know, good intentions and firmly held beliefs, some of which are in conflict, some of which are just in disagreement, some of which are just different. I really feel like there are good arguments and problems on all sides, which is the problem and the challenge. And it's all terrible choices, whether it's farmers in the Central Valley, farmers in the Delta, fishermen, fish and wildlife, generally birds, etc., whether north, south, or in the Delta, urban communities. I mean, there's not a big pot of water we can manufacture or do, which some people don't understand. I do think there are some things that we need to figure out how to illuminate, and I'm looking to you all. I'd like to hear what you heard today and your thinking, because I know you've been taking notes on some different things we could do. I mean, there's just been a lot of good points raised. The things that seem unclear, I think, to me, that we haven't gotten further with are, I think that clearly people don't understand the water rights aspects of this in general. I'm not quite sure what to do with that, because we're not going to do Water Rights 101, but the actual impact of water rights on the impact of all these decisions is something that's not really fully understood. Doesn't mean the impact's not there. It just means it's not totally in our control. It's not that we're withholding water from junior water rights holders or something. It's the way the system works. The other thing we do need to clarify is the standards difference. I know it at a gut level. you, Michael, could explain it better, and I don't want you to do it on the fly, but I do think we need to figure out how to articulate more clearly the difference, not necessarily in reference to the difference to our standard, but it's a different question that has to be met in this context, in part because it's a water right proceeding, in part because it's deviating from a standard, in part because it's the procedural piece somewhere needs to be explained in a way people can read and understand. I think there needs to be some consideration of what was asked for last year compared to this year when there is more storage north and south, and yet there's less storage in other places. That's a conundrum that some folks raise that I'm not a judgment on where it needs to be, but it's an issue that needs to be illuminated. I was surprised there wasn't more discussion about where the fish are or aren't and what it is that we're trying to find. There was a bit towards the end of the day, but that seems pretty important. There were some questions about gauging NDOI versus USGS that I didn't have a chance to follow up on that I'm not quite sure what to do with. The question of salinity, it's not really in here, but it's implicated in here, and I know there was a discussion that we should be looking in advance. I mean, part of this is also thinking about the drought operations plan and what comes next. I'm not quite sure how to box those questions. I have a bunch of other questions I won't flag now, just a few of them. This question of evidentiary hearing that a number of people raised, I know we don't want to open it up for everything, we'll be here forever, but if there are discrete questions on which an evidentiary hearing would be valuable, not just in this particular decision, but in other parts of it, I think that's worth exploring, and I want a sense of how long we think that would take, because I know time is short on that. A number of these were answered. So there's just a bunch of questions that have come up in terms of where we go next. I know we've talked about different procedural options, but rather than just going through them, I'd love to hear what you heard today. Not necessarily that changes your mind or validates what you thought, or what you thought you heard today that was helpful. I mean, I don't mean just you, Tom, I mean anyone, in terms of how to put these into categories. And if you guys want to ask questions before they answer, just lump it all and try and take it apart.
Well, I don't know if I'm in any particular shape to take it apart and to be, to actually be provide useful context at this point. I mean, with respect to evidentiary hearing, I think that I need to sit down with the staff and with Michael and Dana and see whether or not, what are the issues that we think would benefit from an evidentiary hearing, and then talk to the board members about it. I think we need to decide whether or not we can, what size box this will be, because, once we open it, it could be, pretty consuming. Michael assures me he thinks he can keep a cap on it, so, but I do think that's predicated on the assumption that we're actually going to be able to pick some very focused issues to have this hearing on. You asked this question about the standard and the standard being different for what we were doing and what is being done by the fishery agencies. And maybe it's because I was actually here and working on all that, and I remember it quite easily. When the Water Board adopted D1641, the standard was what was called reasonable protection. And everyone knows that we couldn't, that it couldn't be quantified. We had a lot of discussion already here about, we can count the water, we can't quantify the benefit.
And that is always true.
And that's always true, and that argument has no end. The only end is there's no more water left, except on the, in the cities and in agriculture, because you can never quantify the biological benefit, but you can always count water very, very effectively, and develop an economic impact for not using it, and put a dollar figure on it. And so there's just no end to it. And Since we had developed something that was called, that we had, the board at that time had decided after, I assure you, interminable discussions of what was reasonable.
Right.
Then the question is, well, how do you flip the coin and say what is unreasonable? And, it does seem as though there's a high burden for the people coming in to say, well, we think that it was, that it is no longer reasonable, that this is a more reasonable approach. And, what I guess part of the question too is, well, what's the level that they have to provide of evidence that in fact it's a reasonable approach? What they came in with the biological assessment, and Diane can correct me if I'm wrong, was there'll be adverse effects to this, there'll be adverse effects to this, there'll be adverse effects to this. We don't think it's unreasonable. And it's, like I say, it's not quantifiable, but there's certainly, there wasn't any question that there were going to be adverse effects for all of the changes that were proposed. And, at what point does it become unreasonable? One factor that I certainly considered was last year a rousing success? And, do we feel that it's appropriate, since if it was successful, to increase the ask, if you will, on the environment from that is being, requested? And I think that under almost any circumstance, you can't say that yet last year was a success. You can't say that it was caused by project operations. I mean, obviously, most of it was the drought, and that drought's going to continue this year. We're going to have that same kind of hit on the aquatic environment, and so where do you draw the line in reasonable and unreasonable? And it's not. There's no bright line, no quantitative barrier, with the one exception, which is nice, that the temperature control. We do have a threshold that seems to be a pretty bright line for temperature control, and so personally, when I try to think about what to do regarding situations like this, I always like to focus first on the bright lines and say, well, we want to be sure we don't cross that. Well, we didn't even do that last year, unfortunately.
Right.
We want to try to make sure that we don't do it this year. Where fish are or aren't, I mean, they're moving around. In our order, we laid out where they were and where they were identified to us in the biological assessment. We got quite a lengthy letter from San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority that says we've got more up-to-date information, and here they've moved to these locations. So, that's new information, and certainly something that we need to consider when we, take a look at this order again. So, like I said, I'm inclined to look real closely at those two issues that I identified during my testimony. Obviously, the real issue that is the crux of the concerns is this issue of the intermediate flows. I can't say I heard anything that was, outside the range or the ideas that I thought about when we made the decision to turn it down. Except, of course, except for the human toll that I think we actually had. Some people who were able to put more of a human face on it, which, of course, is something that you can, that stays with you and you have to seriously consider. So, I do think I need to talk more with my staff and with the board members to see whether or not we should be considering that particular type of amendment. I do recommend to you that we do come back in the second March board meeting with an order for the board to consider. Now, unless it rains, that means that there will be the intermediate flow issue will probably kick in around the beginning of March, as I think you've heard people testify. So depending on the direction that I think we would head for a recommendation to the board, I might have to amend the order before then to address whatever direction we're recommending to the board. And that's kind of unfortunate because, it'll be 2.5 weeks or so under this new order, under what we're recommending to you, without the board having a chance to actually vote on it.
Is there just
So-
no way to do this for that March, the first March board meeting? I know we had the workshop day, but you just let it go yesterday. I think there's a lot of work to do between
yeah.
now and then, but still, again, that we have this strange time crunch. I'm not keen on waiting a whole month.
Well, you know,
I know we'll have conversations in the next few days as well, but
I guess the only point that I was going to make is, and Tom is correct, I mean, it's unfortunate that perhaps we may end up in a situation where there may need to be some intermediate decisions made on this point before the board actually can act on an order on reconsideration. But I think that's an important facet that we shouldn't lose sight of. I mean, he does have the ability to modify the order, you know, based on a careful consideration with staff on all the comments we heard today. And I think the only thing that I want to add to what Tom has already provided, and it goes back to a point I made earlier, you know, I think one of the things that we'll want to do is sit down as staff, is consider some of the comments we've heard today and see if we can get better written comments in a very short period of time that might help answer some of the questions, and especially kind of the disconnect that was brought forward today between the findings that the fisheries agencies made in their concurrence, which were related to the listed species, and the requirements that we have to satisfy under the water code and make those findings. And you know, you elicited some testimony from the fisheries agencies that you know, can be helpful to staff. But at the same time, I think it's helpful if we really focus commenters on some of those points. So that'll be one of the things that we'll consider. The other thing I just wanted to add is, I mean, Tom made the comment that, you know, we could probably put the evidentiary hearing in a box. And I think there is no way we could put an evidentiary hearing in a box that would let the board issue an order on reconsideration following an evidentiary hearing by the second March board meeting.
No, I think that's right.
And I want to be clear about that. But there was you know, one of the things that, and it's too bad Mr. Herrick's still not here to hear me agree with something that he said, and that is that there may be some opportunities to think thoughtfully about the types of requests that will be coming later. You may recall when the drought operations plan came in back in January, I said one of the things that we'd like to do is to make sure that we can actually issue an order on reconsideration so that there's some finality, and that ideally we get all the requests bundled together. Obviously, that didn't happen.
That was kind of our hope. So
but
that
if we can
could
start
have
to look at some of the issues, evidentiary type issues or factual type issues that will likely come to the fore in those subsequent requests that we'll see from the projects, we might be able to front load it in such a way that we can at least address those through an evidentiary hearing process. Again, it's going to need to be very discrete issues if we're going to have any meaningful opportunity to respond on the timelines that are necessary for the drought. But it at least will, I think, address some of the concerns that you heard from a variety of the stakeholders, that there should be the opportunity to really test through rigor in a hearing type process. Some
It
of the
came from
assumptions.
every side of the spectrum.
And I do believe that it doesn't take a big imagination to figure out what it is the projects are going to ask for in the next few months. They're going to ask for a continuation of what they've already asked for, and they're going to ask for Edmonton to be relaxed, which is basically the same requests that they made last year.
Right. And the barriers, correct? If
what's
it
that?
doesn't rain, the barriers?
Yeah, the barriers could be a request if there really isn't any rain at all. But personally, I'd hold off on pushing that idea. I mean, it's not something I think they're very enthusiastic about doing, and it would have to be pretty critical for them to propose it.
I don't want to occupy all the time. I want you guys to be able to ask whatever questions you have to throw into the mix. I do think getting we had comments about the global issues, and we weren't limited really just to the TUCP. I know I pressed people to focus on the TUCP, and some people finally did, but some focused comments in the short run on the TUCP terms themselves with an explanation of what we need, I think would be helpful, because I think people have addressed all kinds of things. People have expressed themselves, which is, again, totally valid, but folks have not focused on exactly the question before us, and sometimes because they don't really understand what the question before us is. So I'm agreeing with you, I think.
I'll make this short in the interest of time. I think the issues I was going to bring up has already been brought up by you as well as Tom and Mr. Lalfer. In fact, I will do another toss-out to Mr. Herrick and say that I was also going to invoke his name and his request in
I'd be
terms.
so pleased.
Yes, and Mr. Lalfer beat me to it, but it sounds, and we are missing a couple of colleagues, but it sounds, and if you disagree, please let me know, but it sounds like we are definitely concurring with Mr. Howard's suggestion that an order be brought to the board for consideration or reconsideration, as the case may be. And it sounds like we're directing staff to think about some type of focused evidentiary hearing. And it sounds like we're also directing staff to try to frame such hearing and whatever order that is brought before the board as much as possible to be forward-looking with respect to any additional changes that the projects might be requesting for the remainder, at least, of this water year anyway.
I think it's two things.
It's two things.
It's a potential both and. I mean, that's looking for options to be bundled, because we might do an order on reconsideration as soon as we
That's
can,
true.
and then do evidentiary hearings on the longer term if it's not possible to use an evidentiary hearing for the short term on the narrow. But I mean, I'm open. I actually want options.
Options on the process. Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
I'd like to see some options on choices. So I think that we're moving in the direction here of getting the next time this comes before us to have it be much more focused. And there's been some discussion here about the fishery impacts and the reasonableness standard. So I think we all seem to be on the same page about we need to be able to hone in on that standard as opposed to what the fish agencies were looking at. But it's, sorry. But I'd also like for us to have more focused information regarding the potential benefits. And I have to say that, and I'm going to just use this opportunity, I've talked with Mr. Howard about this quite a bit. I want to use this as an opportunity to be able to talk with my colleagues. Unfortunately, you know, two aren't here, but I was very disappointed when I read the order because it went through a discussion of an analysis on the reasonableness standard. I felt that I couldn't quite track where the conclusions were coming from. We had the biological reviews that we ended up getting, so I think that this period of time here will help us to get more information there. But on the water supply impacts or the water effects analysis, the focus was just on water supply, deliveries. And as we saw today, there's a human element, and I think that we can hone in on the areas that would benefit. I don't know if Santa Clara would actually get that water or not, but I'd like to be able to have a sense of, I think I know where it might go, but I don't want to be guessing, and I guess that's our role to eventually balance, but I think that we can probably get a better sense with a more direct request of information. Hopefully the projects will be able to give us a better sense by then about the allocation and any change that would occur. So I think that if we have that information, that will put us in a better position to be able to balance. Because reading through the order, I didn't feel that it was balanced in terms of the information that even presented. So hopefully in this interim period, we'll be able to get that additional information so that we can balance. And I would also request, the other thing that sort of frustrated me, and I know this is the very nature of a staff recommendation. This is not the first board I've been on, but I felt that the information that was presented to us in sort of the initial discussions, between us and staff, that it was very one-sided. So when it comes to us, I would like to be able to have more information, including a contrary view and options. I'd like to be able to see what other options are out there. And speaking of options, what other options are out there other than the ramped or tiered export increase? Could we look at, I know Les talked about this earlier, but maybe a softer ramp? What would that look like in terms of benefits and impacts, on either side? And then also, are there any other protections that could be provided? Any other protections on, for example, I know, Tom, you were concerned about monitoring. What other bells and whistles can we put on the monitoring program? Are there any other protections that could be added as part of, conditions in order to provide for perhaps some greater certainty in the event that we do have these increases in order to protect the estuary? I don't know if there are or not, but I'd like to know if they're, not just from staff, but from others that would comment in this interim period on a more, focused set of questions.
Meaning asking people for questions, asking people for the questions to be asked
No.
of them, or you want staff?
No. What I'm saying is we're going to be perhaps having a focused set of questions that would be posed to the fish agencies and others on this issue of reasonableness. It's up to us to determine reasonableness, but their
Well, it's up to them
opinion.
to meet the burden of the change they were asking for. I think
Right.
that's the problem, and staff had very little time
Right. I mean, they
to answer. I get why you'd like more. I think they did pretty well with the time they had, but now we're into
Right.
we've had time.
Yeah, let's get more information there. Let's get more refined information on the potential benefits. We had a lot of people showing up here today. I wouldn't want to make a decision based on, the need to get Porterville water, and then we find out, it's not going to make a difference. It's not going to get to Porterville anyway, because we're talking about a range of an amount that
May or may not materialize,
yeah.
right? Even
Right,
under what's
right. So just to kind of hone in on the benefits. But as far as additional questions, I was asking on anything additional that could be added, conditions with respect to ramped or tiered export increases.
Oh, meaning asking if there were other conditions that could be put on the request to ameliorate the fish issues people were concerned about, or
Right.
anything else. Okay.
Right.
Sorry, I just didn't understand.
If I might add, I certainly can appreciate your desire for more information and more options. I would just caution, and I think the chairwoman started to say this already, and that is, given the very, very limited time that we will have, not to mention staff, to tee this up, that will certainly put a restriction in terms of, what they'll be able to come back to us with. And then keeping in mind that, certainly I would love to have more certainty and quantification of the benefits as well as the impacts. And that just is not possible. So I think we just have to accept, I think we do know this, and I would just say it, that we're going to be making decisions in the face of tremendous uncertainty. And Mr. Howard is right in that it is ultimately going to be a judgment call, because there is no certainty and quantification, as much as I would love to have that as an engineer upon which to make decisions. So I would say rather than give staff an almost impossible charge to come back to us with voluminous, or at least, data and option that I don't know that they have any way of getting in any of a short time period. I don't know how to reframe your request in a way that is feasible within the very, very short time frame.
I would expect that the projects would give us that information.
And I'm unclear whether they can.
Me too.
So just, maybe they can, maybe they can't.
If they can't, it's the burden's on them. Yeah.
But it's in some ways, it's hard to see where it, I actually think the fish question's harder to figure out, and so you need to know whether it's an unreasonable impact on the fish first, given the situation that we're in and the work that was done. Again, I know Board Member Dudek has sat through setting these standards, so I have two,
As
but
staff.
as staff, but at a more
With
removed.
all the days
I'm just,
of
I'm
evidentiary
like at a,
hearings
right? So
in the
you've
middle
been
of summer.
been through those, but I think it'll be hard to pick one use it would go to over another. The fact is, all of that water would help somebody or something somewhere, and that's the dilemma we have. There's just not enough water.
Well, yeah, it may be, but I think it makes a difference where that water goes, and it also would be helpful to get a sense of where it could go, and if there are areas that. I don't know. I don't know what you guys thought when you read through the order, but I read through the order, and there just wasn't information at all, other than last year's allocation. We have a couple of executive orders that talk about the need for us to be able to expedite transfers and move water where it needs to go. Steve Chedester spoke about transfers. So we had some comment about the refuge impacts or benefits and groundwater supplies. We also have, a state goal now to be dealing with groundwater impacts. So I don't expect that we're going to know 100%. As Tom said, we're probably going to know a lot more than we would on the fish side, because those benefits can be more easily quantified than the impacts. I'm not expecting a big exercise. I think that the projects will be able to give us a sense where they believe the water would go and who it would benefit.
To which project and who would be most senior?
Yeah, they have their allocation system. I don't think it's going to be terribly difficult. I have a guess of where it will go, but I wouldn't want to be the one guessing. I'd rather hear from the projects.
Well, let me take that point and push it a little bit further. I don't remember now who made the suggestion. That's one of the people who spoke. But there was a suggestion made that the board direct any additional water that might be pumped as a result of the temporary urgent change petition towards specific, needs towards, I think the suggestion was made towards specific communities even. Since it's late and we're all tired and I feel like playing devil's advocate, Mr. Laufer, what do you think about that idea?
I'm trying to pick my words carefully here, because there are some pretty powerful concepts in the Constitution with respect to waste and unreasonable use, but it would be some pretty tremendous findings that would have to be made in order to do that kind of redirection.
But we did make the finding with respect to health and safety in the Deer Mill and Antelope Creek curtailment.
Well, going through using very explicit emergency regulation authority, the board did provide an exception from a regulation that it was establishing for purposes of. So I don't think that the paradigm fits quite as well into the water rights that are being conditioned here. At one point in time last year, based on the project's request, of course, there was a condition that the water conserved had to be used to serve minimum health and safety needs. And that's a fairly general concept that a number of commenters had a fair bit of discomfort with, which I think the board and others heard about over the spring. But it sounds like what you're discussing for consideration is even more specific than that in terms of targeting it to specific communities. Like I said, anyone who knows how I advise the board knows that I recognize the tremendous powers that it has, and I rarely take options off the table, but I think that would be a heavy lift for the board, given the constraints under which it operates.
Yeah, but we're being asked to make trade-offs.
Well, we can certainly ask the projects, as Board Member Diadamo mentioned, and say, you know, okay, if
And
you
hold
were
them
to
to
get
it?
50,000 acre-feet out of this, where would it go?
And hold them to it?
Well, I guess we would ask them to, you know, we'd put it in the order, I guess, if we said, if they said that this is where it was going to go, if they were willing to come in and say, yes, that's where it's going. I don't see, under that circumstance, I would think Michael would say it would be okay to put it into an order.
I mean, I appreciate, even as an engineer, respecting the law and the water rights seniority, you know, process and all that, but we are being asked to make very difficult decisions in balancing and making trade-offs, and if that's the case, then I want to know, you know, what I'm getting for this.
Right.
And make sure that it goes where I am told it's going to go.
Well, like I said, we will ask the projects. First, we will ask them and the fishery agencies if they have any additional information other than the bioassessment that has already been provided that they could provide us that would be used to either show that it's, you know, what the biological effects of this particular change might be. And so we'll ask both the projects and the fishery agencies that question. We will also ask the projects if they can tell us where, if it was 50,000 or, you know, I mean, I don't think it's 100,000, but if it was in the area of 50 or 60 or 70,000, where they would send that water. Since it would, obviously it would go first to St. Louis probably, or, and then from there it would be allocated out. And we'll see what kind of response we get from them. And I guess the board would also like us to put out some solicitation for public comments for the next few days, because, you know, I heard something about collecting more information on fish. If anyone has any.
I think the way that it was left, and certainly the board can provide further direction, was that, you know, at least at the staff level, we would have an opportunity to figure out what the right questions to ask, and perhaps, you know, while Thomas characterized it as asking the fisheries agencies if they have additional information on the biological assessments and the projects, I think we'd just be asking generally of all people, yeah, and I think the big challenge we have is trying to write a question or a series of questions that, you know, really will let us focus on the key issues and not have a whole bunch of extraneous information coming in that really doesn't move the ball forward.
Yeah.
Can I make one comment? I just think we need to think through the timeline for doing this, getting an order out 10 days in advance, having a comment period, and drafting an order. You know, there does need to be some thought to how this process is going to go, given the time constraints with that. I just think we should slow down and think about how much time it's going to take to get a notice out for more comments, get the comments in, process the comments, write an order, get a draft order out, bring it to you, and get it out 10 days in advance. I mean, realistically, it's looking like that's a lot to do. So I don't know. And also, we can limit what we ask people for, but they give us what they want to give us, you know, and we're all obliged to review all of that information. So I just want to make that point.
I want strategic thought first in coming back to us. I mean, I get that we can't do this on the fly at 9 o'clock at night. I mean, we're just trying to give you those thoughts, but I would like options back on how to proceed. And you get to talk to us, and you can talk to the projects, and you can talk to the fish agent. We're just the ones who can't during this process. And so the smarter thing to do is to figure out how to give us options to deal with the issues we've raised, what those timelines would be to try and illuminate and get to a decision quickly, not just in the short term, but in the longer term in a way that helps people not just do the same thing all over again, but get more targeted info to us, whether it's just the agencies or it's the general public. I mean, I'm open. I think you've heard all the issues, and we'll compare notes on it. You'll have to meet with us individually after this. But it seems like there are a number of different options on how to proceed. So I don't want to jump to a conclusion about what hearing we're doing on what day, because what I don't want to have happen is we leave here today and you all are working your butts off and you're just giving us some draft that goes out and we haven't had further conversations based on being able to think about what our options are, because that's not a good use of your time, and it's not a good use of our time either if you could have put in front of us
Well, here's
options.
here's a suggestion, and maybe it is too late to offer suggestions, but I know that there's not enough time to have any sort of a hearing or an order at our first March meeting. But how about if the staff comes back to us at that point, or is that too late? Because then you have to be working on the order in order to get it out 10 days. I guess I'm looking for an opportunity for us at our the next opportunity we have to get together to have a follow-up discussion with staff before some kind of a draft order
Well,
is
in
sent
addition
out.
to them talking to us individually
Exactly.
beforehand, which they are fully capable of
Yes,
doing.
but we don't get to hear each
Right.
other.
No, I agree. Both are good. So put that into the options bin of how to make that work.
Well, we would have to notice it tomorrow for a board, we'd have to amend the workshop notice and get it.
Workshop notice at this time. I mean, the agenda has not gone out
Oh.
yet, but if we want to add it to the agenda, we can add it to the agenda.
I think
Yeah,
we
we
should.
could add it for a discussion on that Wednesday.
And then we hopefully we'll have our other
And they
two
would figure out.
colleagues as well.
Right, who would then listen to this. We did, but we're all still here. We released it, but have people gone to, are they
think we
going
may
to
not have a
Tahiti?
room.
It just happened yesterday.
I think we may not have a room is what she
Just
said.
see if we can still have a room.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So we want to still keep Wednesday then
Yeah.
as a,
Yeah, as a discussion at least, but we're going to leave it to staff to come back to us this week individually with options and figure it out.
We'll give that some thought this evening. I mean, one of the things, and process is important, but I hope all the board members recognize that just even if it's noticed on the agenda, there ends up being a fairly significant staff cost associated with just sort of prepping it up, which will detract from the ability to both spend time looking at the comments that come in and making the recommendations. I recognize there's value. That's the only time that you all get an opportunity to talk. But if you're going to be talking about that issue, you're going to have a lot of the same folks who are here today wanting to provide input, and you just need to be aware. There's going to be, it will be an opportunity to touch base and for you all to communicate publicly, but it will probably come at the cost of being able to have anything ready at the second March board meeting.
That seems extreme. I see how that could be a potential, but at 9, 10 at night when I haven't seen your options on how we could proceed, I don't want to say we're not going to talk again for a month
I understand.
about this.
I
That just
And-
doesn't
and
feel
if-
right.
making sure
and
you're all
if-
aware of.
And if I think the microphones are off. And if we're truly not going to talk again until next month when an order is before us, that's going to be a very ugly meeting. I mean, that would be a very lengthy discussion.
Yeah, and
It's
part
kind of
of
like
the way.
pay now or pay later, Michael. I mean,
Well, no. And part of what I'm suggesting that the board reconsider is maybe it's better to have that pause and go into the first March board meeting with an opportunity, for the staff to have made some recommendations based on the conversations we'll be having internally amongst ourselves over the next couple of days, and perhaps some solicitation of questions, and the opportunity for you all to digest. But rather than setting it up for a board order to be for consideration at the second March board meeting, it may be better to use that first March board meeting as a launching point, with the target really being an order on reconsideration for the first April meeting. I don't know how that fits in with staff options, but that just seems to be a more thoughtful process to get to a decision, as opposed to trying to cram everything in the next month when we're talking about potentially having a comment period in here, potentially having another workshop, which again, it may seem like a lot of this just, the conversations, the structure of what's going to be noticed for that first March board meeting will take time from staff, time that could be spent, developing options and working forward. So if we're going to make that commitment, I just think it might be better, and obviously we'll do what the board wants, and Tom and Diane and Les may have different perspectives on it, but it seems better to recognize that will probably push out when an order on reconsideration is before the board, and to kind of make that call now, as opposed to rushing forward for a meeting in 2 weeks with a target of an order in 4 weeks, but being released in essentially 2 weeks plus 1 day.
Well, I can't say without having follow-up and seeing how good the options are, how well you listened to what was said, both by everybody here. Or I get that may be a choice. I can't make it tonight. I need to get the quality of your thinking on what the options are for the things we can do, and then we can make some choices. That I don't want to wait until the 4th or the 3rd to do. So you are going to have to come back to us and just talk to us individually and see if we can find a sweet spot. I understand the consequence. It may well be that we can get to something relatively quickly if we narrow what it is we're talking about.
Just add another thought and just a reminder. The early March seems to be the point at which one of the key issues, which is, the part that was not approved in the TUCP, that's in early March is when that's going to come into play.
Right.
So if it's just another item before the board where you get to do, this is great about the public process, you'll get to talk and direct and digest what you've already heard. And in the intervening period, at least what we can do is we can work with the department and the Bureau to better understand the water supply costs of the different options, perhaps even have some other options, so we could have some of that to know about, the water. We're not going to be able to answer or synthesize more information about the science, things like that, but at least we would have both, because time has passed, we'll know better how March is unfolding, and we'd have some of those numbers, and then an opportunity to give more direction, and then Tom, I imagine, could issue an order making a course correction in the intervening if we get some additional direction. That being said, it's still a tall order but that would be an executive director order. It'd still be a tall order to have something ready to go imminently based on direction that we would have received at that time. In terms of then coming to the later March meeting, since this is one of the key issues, I know we don't want to drop this forever and we want to have process and have it come to the board, but perhaps there's nothing magical about then that second March meeting, and that's the more viable target is something in April once we've resolved what we need to do doing what we need to do in March.
I want to see you chart out the options on a piece of paper.
Yes, we'll do that. Be talking to the board members in the next day or two. We
Thank
probably will try to get a list of questions together as well in the next day or two so that we can get that out as soon as possible. But we'll bring that.
Look at it. Yeah,
back
it
to the
doesn't have to
board
be
members, too.
exhaustive again, narrow.
Sure. I think that we've beaten this to death.
We have, and we've all asked you for a lot of different things, which is part of the challenge, I understand.
Sure, and we'll
but
try and get you some, be talking with you and get you information in the next day or two. Good, thank you.
Thank you. So, and we'll all make ourselves available to do that. Thank you. Oh, Tom, sorry to do this. The two issues that came up, the two items that you mentioned early on, the issue of you retaining jurisdiction over the water that you want to eliminate I don't see any reason why you can't just do that, or maybe you don't need to do it because everybody's heard you say it. The transfer issue we really didn't talk about enough to fully understand. People were saying different things about it, and I know there was a reason behind what you were doing, and there were different views of that. That's something we have to figure that one out. So that's something to
Sure.
talk about. If it
Personally,
weren't
I think as long
9:15, I'd
as-
say we should have a long conversation about it right now.
I mean, I don't think that either one is that important to do, as long as folks know that we are working on amending it. Because with respect to the transfer, there's not going to be any transfers in March
Correct.
anyway.
Right.
But we want people to know that we're supportive of transfers and that we will try to figure out a way to make that as workable as we can. Because I don't want people to be saying, well, I'm not even going to try to transfer this year because I can see in the board's order that they're not going to be approving it because this is a state water project transfer, and that's not allowed. So, with respect to that, I think it can wait, but we probably have to let people know that, we're going to be soliciting comments on it or something.
Okay.
I mean, we could maybe make it one of the questions.
I'm sorry, it's awfully late, but I do have a concern about this. I think I understand what you're saying, but I'm not quite sure. So if I were out there working on, because this is the time of year, well, not now, even before now, this is the time of year where those negotiations are going on. And so I guess I don't really know what that means. So if I were working on a transfer, not knowing what it means, I'd just be concerned that it could have an effect on the ability for people to put those agreements together.
And yeah, I can't, I can't say that that's not true. That it could be that there are people out there who would be concerned and who would be hesitant to move into a transfer as long as the words were the way they are today. So, it might be something that we need to get a change out in the next week or so, but it
Okay.
is something also, I think, that is going to require a little conversation among staff and whatnot. So
Right.
that'll be one of the things that we'll
You talk
bring
to us in the next
you, and
couple
we'll
of
talk
days.
to you too.
Okay.
And then, of course, the other one really has no real impact until, a number of months from now, and so I don't know that. But if I was changing something in the near future, I'd go ahead and change that too. So I don't know whether it's worth sending out another order just for that one provision. But if I change the transfer one, we'll change that one at the same time.
Okay.
And I think that's an easier one to deal with, what the wording would be.
All right. We will be talking a lot. Thank you all. Thanks for staying with us. Appreciate it. We'll be talking as much as we can. Meeting is adjourned, and our priorities discussion has been now bounced to another meeting. Unless you want to talk now.
I didn't mean all those things. I was just saying it for everybody else.
Come on, Tim.